It's no secret that cluster jewels are strong. At their worst, optimized cluster setups are simply a requirement for any efficient skill tree. At their best, they're so desirable that you literally can't stack enough of them. Either way, my honest opinion on cluster jewels is that if you have the currency to afford them, but your build doesn't use them, then your build probably sucks. I can already hear the cries of a million angry YouTube comments. My Whispering Ice Totem's chieftain doesn't use clusters, so you're wrong. Or, I killed Shaper with no clusters on my Essence Drain Trickster, so you're wrong. Or, my level 100 Cyclone Slayer in Standard only gains about 5% DPS from clusters, so you're wrong. I'm sorry, but no, you're wrong. Even if you aren't playing a Herald Stacking Guardian or a Warcry Berserker, clusters are still disgustingly efficient at giving you whatever stats your character is lacking. The question isn't if your character should be using clusters, but when. When GGG introduces new mechanics, players should find them rewarding and want to interact with them. I get it. Power creep and new build opportunities are huge parts of what keeps us coming back every 3 months. But recently, I noticed a trend that said power creep is getting steeper, and cluster jewels are just the latest symptom of a potentially bigger problem. The first league that started introducing these levels of power creep was Synthesis. Sure, we had some insane Shaper and Elder mods as well as fossil crafting before that, but these didn't come close to the overwhelming power pretty much any build could gain from synthesized items such as Onslaught Boots, Arcane Surge Rings, or Exploding Weapons. Luckily, Fractured Crafting didn't go core, but that was only due to the poor reception of Synthesis as a whole. The next big offender came quickly in the form of Legion's Timeless Jewels. Due to their random nature and the difficulty involved with trading them, they weren't perceived as much of a problem. However, they still provided a serious power increase for builds that could efficiently use them, which of course ended up being a fairly common trait across the Pee-wee.Ninja leaderboards. Blight and Metamorph introduced oils and catalysts, which although they weren't absurdly strong, instantly became mandatory factors that every build had to worry about. Simply put, no build these days is truly finished until you've anointed your amulet and qualitied up your jewelry. In case you're not sure why power creep is a bad thing, let me explain. Path of Exile is a game that receives huge updates every 3 months, and to keep players coming back, GGG tries to make new content that's fun and rewarding. An unfortunate side effect of this endeavor is that old content becomes less appealing, and when the power creep becomes too extreme, said old content becomes literally pointless. If you need an example, just think about the last time you were excited to see talismans drop. Another more personal complaint I have about power creep is its effect on widespread build viability. Although GGG has tried to address this recently by tuning up the game's difficulty, the ceiling for character power levels is still getting higher and higher. Quadrupling Shaper's life doesn't make much of a difference to meta builds that can pump out over 100 million DPS, but it certainly hurts more niche options that used to get by with only a couple 100,000. Many players see this disparity as inevitable, so I understand if you aren't all on board with this complaint, but I still believe it to be a negative consequence of power creep that GGG should be trying to avoid. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. The crux of this video is that I'm worried about how Delirium is going to go core. In all likelihood, Delirium portals will simply have a 10% chance to appear in maps, and the rewards will be rebalanced to mostly drop Simulacrum Splinters, Cluster Jewels, and Delirium Orbs. Additionally, Herald stacking will be nerfed so deep into the ground that Nico will still be digging for it by the time Path of Exile 3 comes out. My concern is that this is not good for the game's health. Firstly, I don't think Delirium mirrors as a mechanic should go core without some serious retuning. We're 2 months into the league, and I still lose frames and experience stutters every few maps. The fog is also way too inconsistent, with maps like Tropical Island absolutely dominating every other option. And lastly, having rewards so integral to creating proper skill trees tied to a traditional 10% league mechanic is just a bad idea. Speaking of cluster jewels, these bad boys are what I'm most worried about. I'm not talking about the overpowered stuff like Heraldry, Vicious Bite, or Cry Wolf. The big offenders will be nerfed. What I'm actually worried about is their unparalleled ability to kill build diversity and enable degenerate levels of power creep. In my opinion, the vanilla Path of Exile skill tree is a thing of beauty. It's a series of memorable notables, thematic passive wheels, and interesting efficiency trade-offs for different classes. Cluster jewels, on the other hand, are the exact opposite. All they require you to do is identify the most overpowered cluster notables for your build, path to the necessary jewel sockets, and stack as many of them as you can afford. Don't believe me? Take a look at Pee-wee.Ninja's passive tree heat map for Metamorph. Even with minion builds accounting for over a third of the softcore economy's high-level player base, things still look pretty varied. Now, take a look at Delirium's heat map. Yeah. To be fair, over 60% of these entries are Herald stackers, which does skew things, but I still maintain my claim. The original skill tree is a magical puzzle that presents a different challenge every time you try to solve it, whereas cluster jewels are like a 3-week-old crossword that your local newspaper keeps accidentally reprinting. So, since I've bitched nonstop for the last 5 minutes, I should probably offer a solution. Honestly, just scrap Delirium. It's laggy, drops too many items, and rewards cluster jewels. I know a lot of you enjoyed the league's tanky monsters, simple mechanics, and overall profitability, but I personally don't think the pros outweigh the cons. I'm sorry, but I just think Path of Exile would be better off without it. Okay, now that I've shared my hopes and dreams, I can come back to reality. Delirium was GGG's most popular league to date, and there is no way in hell they'll waste all the hard work that went into designing cluster jewels. So, assuming Delirium does go core, here's my second solution. Separate Delirium mirrors and cluster jewels while heavily increasing the drop rate of the latter. Buff the various cluster notables that aren't seeing much use. And lastly, disallow identical cluster notables from stacking with each other. As much as I would prefer for Delirium simply not to go core, I do think this proposal would solve most of the fundamental concerns I've tried to express. First of all, separating Delirium mirrors and cluster jewels would allow people like me to avoid a mechanic they dislike while still having access to these new fundamental building blocks of every skill tree. Secondly, buffing underused cluster notables will help improve that sense of identity and flavor I spoke about in regards to the regular skill tree. We already see this with notables like Heraldry, Crywolf, and Purposeful Harbinger, but those are more of a product of extreme overtuning. I want to see more iconic yet balanced notables like Survivalist, Master of the Arena, and Doomcast. And finally, the most important change that needs to be made in regards to Delirium is to prevent the same cluster notables from stacking with each other. This change would single-handedly fix most of my complaints about the system as a whole. It would transform cluster jewels into an actual trade-off that builds would have to consider. Sure, most builds would probably still want at least one cluster setup, but degenerate stuff like medium notable stacking via voices and megalomaniacs would be gone. In conclusion, I have one more thing to say. I know this video sounds all doom and gloom and will probably rub a lot of people the wrong way, but I'm actually pretty optimistic about Path of Exile's future. This trend of crazy power creep is only about a year old, which makes me think that all these systems, from fractured crafting to cluster jewels, are really just experiments to see what's worth carrying over to Path of Exile 2. In fact, even if Delirium does go core in the way I initially mentioned, I'm confident that GGG will re-examine its place in the endgame before shipping PoE 2. I would just prefer it if we didn't have to wait that long. Thanks for watching, this has been Nathan, and I'll catch you next time.
Goodbye, not a cockroach.
Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters, Real Human, Zikarak, Squally, Zoljan, Coda, Julia Allen, Kepler, Sparky Cata, Heiser801, Kyle, Logan, Ice Dude, Ginsink, Anonymous, Alex, Orangina, Marius, Bombfair, and Lloyd. I appreciate the support, it means a lot to me. If anyone else is interested in joining these awesome people, you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/NathanBrotherBob, or if you want to check me out on Twitch, I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time at twitch.tv/NathanBrotherBob. I also have a Twitter there, NathanBroBob, and an Instagram, NathanWalkerYT. My girlfriend's helping me keep those up to date. And if you don't have any monies, well, I guess it really doesn't matter if you have money or not for the other things, but for this specifically, if you want to join my community, you can check out my Discord there in the top right-hand corner. You know, we're just a bunch of people hanging out and talking about PoE, and that's a fun thing to do. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.